All the stuff that we poured out onto the internet all these years is a form of an Akashic Records, because we really have access to information like never before. But on the more spiritual level, here it is, it's out there.
Hidden within every moment of life is a layer of reality most people never notice, a living memory of all events, thoughts, and intentions. Rudolf Steiner revealed that this realm, known as the Akashic Records, is not distant or abstract. It exists around us and within us, ready to be perceived when the mind and heart align. These records do not appear through force or intellect alone. They reveal themselves to those who cultivate stillness, humility, and discernment. In this video, you'll discover how images and symbols arise as living guides, carrying insight beyond ordinary understanding. By learning the practices Steiner taught, you can open a doorway to this hidden tapestry instantly, uncovering wisdom that illuminates your personal path and connects you to the broader currents of humanity. The veil between worlds. There are dimensions of existence that most people pass through without noticing, yet they shape everything we call reality. Rudolf Steiner described human perception as layered, like a series of veils that separate ordinary consciousness from a deeper, living record of all that has ever occurred. These layers are not abstract or imaginary. They are woven into the very fabric of life, waiting to be perceived by those who cultivate their inner senses. Steiner called this perception supersensible, a way of seeing that goes beyond the five senses, reaching into currents of memory, intention, and meaning that flow invisibly around us. Even in the moments we consider ordinary, there is more happening than what meets the eye. Thoughts, feelings, and actions leave subtle traces, echoes that endure in ways we rarely recognize. Steiner often spoke of this invisible network as a kind of cosmic memory, a living archive of every choice, every hope, every secret. It is what later came to be called the Akashic Records. These records are not dusty books on a hidden shelf. They are not locked away in some distant realm. They exist in the very spaces that surround life itself, waiting to be encountered when consciousness is willing to notice. To perceive this hidden record, the mind cannot operate in its usual distracted way. Ordinary thought moves quickly, jumping from one concern to another, rarely lingering on a single moment long enough to touch the currents beneath. Steiner explained that the human soul must first learn to dwell with stillness, to allow attention to settle without forcing it. In this quiet, the layers of perception begin to loosen, and the first glimpses of the unseen start to appear. The veil between worlds is not lifted by force, but by readiness, by the willingness to receive without immediately labeling or judging what arises. Steiner's lectures often illustrated the way images emerge from this deeper consciousness. A pattern in nature, a face in a dream, or even a fleeting intuition can carry information that transcends ordinary experience. These impressions are not arbitrary. They are signposts from the hidden record itself. They convey meaning in a language that is felt as much as understood, a language of essence rather than words. When a person begins to notice them, the world feels different, charged with layers that were always present but previously invisible. The Akashic Records, in this view, are a living tapestry rather than a static library. Every event, every intention, every shift in the heart leaves a thread in this vast weave. Steiner described how these threads intersect, forming patterns that reveal connections across time and space. To perceive them is to enter into a dialogue with life itself, to recognize that existence is not a series of isolated moments, but a continuous flow where cause and effect, spirit and matter, are intimately bound together. It is a perception that reshapes the way one experiences both the inner and outer world. Yet the path to this vision is not automatic. Steiner emphasized preparation. One cannot simply wish to see the Akashic Records and expect them to appear. There must be a conscious effort to refine perception, to strengthen inner awareness. Meditation, attentive observation, and moral clarity were all part of the training he recommended. The inner life becomes a vessel, attuned to subtle movements, capable of discerning what arises from genuine insight and what is merely imagination or projection. Each step toward clarity is a step through the veil, a step closer to the living record that envelops all existence. Even the first glimmers of these hidden currents can feel disorienting. The ordinary sense of time and self shifts when one touches the broader memory of the world. What seems impossible begins to make sense, and familiar experiences reveal hidden layers. Steiner often noted that the encounter is less about acquiring information and more about developing a relationship with the unseen. The Akashic Records are not read, they are felt, experienced, and engaged with. They respond to the seeker's readiness, their attention, and the sincerity with which they approach the process. As the veil begins to part, the mind starts to sense that what was once thought distant is already present. Each inner movement, each conscious act, becomes part of a greater story woven into life itself. The hidden currents stir, and the first hints of patterns emerge. This is the threshold, the point where preparation meets perception. From here, the seeker must learn to cultivate stillness and clarity, to enter the inner space where the Akashic Records move and speak. It is a beginning, a quiet invitation into a world where ordinary perception gives way to a living memory that awaits those willing to see. The first key, quieting the inner noise. Attention is rarely still. Even in moments of apparent calm, thoughts ripple through the mind, bouncing between past regrets and future concerns. Steiner taught that this restless movement of thought acts as a veil of its own, a barrier that prevents perception of the deeper currents within and around us. The mind, if left unchecked, becomes a storm, scattering awareness and drowning out the subtle signals that arise from the Akashic Records. To reach those hidden layers, one must first learn to quiet this inner turbulence. Silence is more than the absence of sound. It is an active cultivation of inner clarity. Steiner emphasized that by observing the mind without judgment, one begins to notice how easily attention is pulled in different directions. The very act of watching them pass without attachment gradually reduces their power. In this quieting, the soul finds a rhythm that aligns with the deeper currents of knowledge, a rhythm that makes perception of the hidden record possible. The early Christian mystics, known as the Desert Fathers, practiced what they called hezekiah, a form of disciplined inner stillness. They would withdraw into deserts and caves, sitting in solitude, repeating simple prayers or focusing on breath, until the constant chatter of the mind softened. Steiner often drew parallels to this practice, suggesting that cultivating hezekiah strengthens the faculties needed to perceive the Akashic Records, providing a foundation for more vivid inner imagery. In practical terms, quieting the mind requires persistence and patience. Each moment of distraction feeds the habitual patterns that keep the deeper senses dormant. Steiner described exercises that train the mind to linger on a single observation, whether it is a natural object, a rhythm, or an image arising from imagination. By gently returning attention to a single focus again and again, the mind learns to settle. This settlement is not emptying the mind, but allowing the background currents of thought to recede so the deeper layers of consciousness can emerge. As stillness grows, inner images begin to awaken spontaneously. These are not the fleeting daydreams of ordinary imagination, but living symbols that carry meaning from the unseen realm. A pattern in a cloud, a recollection of a moment that arises vividly without effort, or a sudden intuition may signal the stirring of the hidden record within consciousness. Steiner emphasized that these images are not random. They are signals, pointing toward truths that lie beyond the ordinary flow of thought. The quiet mind becomes receptive, able to distinguish between ordinary fantasies and meaningful impressions. Hezekiah also trains the soul in patience. In the desert, the fathers waited for insight to emerge naturally, often sitting for hours without any external activity. Similarly, Steiner noted that the Akashic Records respond not to urgency or force, but to the readiness of the seeker. When the mind slows, a new kind of listening becomes possible. Over time, the silence itself transforms, no longer a passive state, but a medium through which the unseen world communicates. Even in brief moments of inner calm, the mind can access subtle layers of knowledge. A quiet mind does not guarantee immediate visions, but it opens the door for experiences that would otherwise remain hidden. Steiner described how the first hints of insight often appear as fleeting impressions, small patterns in the mental field that draw attention naturally. These impressions carry a clarity and presence that ordinary thoughts do not, signaling that the seeker is beginning to touch the thresholds of the Akashic Records. The cultivation of inner silence also reshapes perception of the external world. When the mind is less entangled, in its own chatter, ordinary events gain new significance. Simple encounters, natural phenomena, or casual observations begin to resonate with layers of meaning that had been obscured. The practice of quieting the mind is therefore both preparation and awakening, allowing the soul to move closer to the currents of the unseen without effort or strain. In this emerging quiet, awareness itself takes on a different quality. It becomes a still mirror, reflecting patterns that are already present rather than creating them. The restless mind, once dominant, now steps aside, and the deeper consciousness begins to communicate through images, intuitions, and impressions. The first key has been turned, the inner noise is stilled, and the seeker is ready to notice the first signs of the hidden record as it begins to make itself known. The next step is learning to interpret these signals, to understand what they mean, and how to follow the thread that has begun to reveal itself. When symbols begin to speak. Perception changes once the mind has grown quiet. In the stillness cultivated through inner practice, images begin to appear spontaneously, arising from layers of consciousness that were previously inaccessible. They carry meaning and guidance, functioning as keys to the hidden currents that flow through all life. Unlike ordinary imagination, these pictures possess an inner coherence, a weight and clarity that draws the attention without effort. They are the first signs that the Akashic Records are beginning to reveal themselves. The nature of these symbols can be startling at first. A pattern in a leaf, a sudden memory, or an intuitive sense may arrive fully formed, yet remain mysterious. Steiner emphasized that each symbol carries its own wisdom, a quality that cannot be translated directly into ordinary language. They speak to the soul in a way that thought alone cannot capture. In their appearance, one begins to understand that knowledge is not always linear. It moves through imagery, through form and essence, rather than through words or logic. Plato's allegory of the cave provides a helpful lens for this experience. In the cave, shadows are mistaken for reality until the prisoner is freed and sees the world in full light. The difference lies in recognition. The seeker must learn to distinguish between fleeting fantasies and symbols carrying authentic insight. Each one becomes a bridge, guiding perception beyond ordinary boundaries and revealing aspects of reality that cannot be grasped by the senses alone. Even ordinary dreams can begin to shift in tone and significance once inner silence is cultivated. A dream that once seemed random may reveal patterns, relationships, and insights that resonate long after waking. Steiner taught that these images are the soul's way of encountering the hidden record. They are not meant to be forced or interpreted hastily. In their timing, form, and detail, they offer a subtle map of higher currents, showing how past, present, and potential future intertwine. The key is attentive observation, allowing symbols to emerge without interference. The awakening of inner imagery often carries a sense of vitality. Symbols move with a life of their own, demanding more than intellectual understanding. Steiner compared this to reading a book in a language one does not yet fully understand. The shapes and gestures communicate something essential, even when precise translation is not yet possible. Each encounter with a symbol deepens the capacity for perception, building a foundation for understanding the wider currents of the Akashic Records. Symbols also act as guides through the veil between worlds. They point toward areas of life that require attention, reflection, or transformation. When observed, they begin to reveal recurring motifs, archetypal patterns that link individual experience to universal principles. Steiner emphasized that these patterns are not imposed by the mind. They are inherent in the currents of existence. Recognizing them requires both stillness and discernment, an ability to see without forcing the meaning and to follow the path they illuminate. A consistent practice strengthens the dialogue between consciousness and these symbols. Daily attention, reflection, and gentle contemplation allow the images to become increasingly vivid and coherent. The seeker may notice a symbol appearing in multiple contexts, a recurring pattern that invites deeper exploration. Steiner noted that this repetition is not a coincidence. It is the record speaking through imagery, drawing attention to essential truths that shape both inner life and outer experience. As these symbols begin to speak, the inner world gains depth and dimension. Each one carries information from the hidden record, offering insight without the need for explanation. Yet with their clarity comes the necessity for careful discernment. Not every impression arises from the Akashic currents. Some are echoes of habit, desire, or projection. The soul must cultivate the ability to distinguish authentic insight from imagination. In learning this skill, the seeker moves closer to a state where the Akashic Records can be accessed directly, through symbols that carry both the presence of the unseen and the resonance of the living world. This is the threshold where quiet observation meets understanding. Symbols arise naturally, but their guidance is only received with attention and sincerity. The mind, now trained in stillness, begins to perceive the patterns behind appearances, sensing connections that were previously hidden. From this awakening, the next stage unfolds, learning how to test these impressions, to cultivate discernment and ensure that insight is rooted in truth rather than desire. It is here that the practice becomes both a gift and a responsibility, preparing the seeker to navigate the deeper currents of the Akashic Records without confusion or illusion. The trial of discernment. As the first images begin to speak, a subtle challenge emerges. Not every impression that arises in stillness carries truth. The mind can project desire, fear, or habit onto the symbols, colouring them with personal expectations. Steiner emphasized that the Akashic Records reflect the seeker's inner truth as much as the outer currents of existence. If the heart is restless, dishonest, or clouded by wishful thinking, the visions can become distorted. The task of discernment is not a matter of skepticism, but of careful attention, ethical grounding, and honesty with oneself. Perception at this stage demands vigilance. A symbol may appear striking, even profound, yet its resonance must be tested against the inner sense of integrity. Steiner often likened this to tuning an instrument. If the strings are uneven or slack, the music is false. Similarly, the seeker must cultivate moral clarity so that the images arising from the hidden record are not mistaken for personal projection. This requires asking subtle questions. Does this impression inspire clarity or confusion? Does it deepen compassion or feed vanity? Such questions anchor perception in authenticity. A Sufi parable illustrates this process beautifully. A seeker asked a teacher how to see the divine within the heart. The teacher presented a polished mirror and said, "First, remove the dust from your own heart, then the reflection will appear." In the same way, the symbols that emerge from the Akashic Records act as mirrors. They reflect not only the wider currents of existence, but also the state of the seeker's inner life. Only when the heart is free of distortion, pride, or selfish desire can the images communicate with clarity and truth. The trial of discernment is ongoing. Every session of quiet reflection, every emerging symbol, becomes a test of sincerity. It is easy to assume that an image carries meaning simply because it is vivid or emotionally charged. Steiner warned that such assumptions can mislead, creating illusions that feel real. The seeker must learn to notice subtle qualities in the imagery, the sense of presence, the coherence of the pattern, the feeling of alignment with deeper life. These subtle markers distinguish authentic insight from the shadows of imagination. Observation alone is not enough. The seeker's inner life must also align with ethical intention. Steiner noted that the Akashic currents respond to sincerity, humility, and a willingness to engage with truth rather than personal gain. Without these qualities, even disciplined practice can lead to confusion or misinterpretation. The task of discernment becomes a moral exercise as much as a perceptual one. In this way, spiritual development and ethical cultivation proceed hand in hand, shaping the clarity of insight that can be received from the hidden record. Patterns begin to reveal themselves as discernment deepens. Repeated symbols, recurring impressions, and consistent intuitions indicate authenticity. They appear across different moments, often independent of the seeker's conscious planning or expectation. Steiner explained that the hidden record communicates through consistency and resonance. The true images carry a weight, a sense of inevitability, while projected fantasies tend to scatter or fade quickly. Recognizing these differences strengthens the connection between the seeker and the currents of knowledge. Even small misalignments in perception can have consequences. A fleeting projection may suggest understanding, yet lead attention away from essential truths. The trial of discernment teaches patience. It asks the seeker to slow down, to observe without jumping to conclusions, and to develop trust in the subtle rhythms of perception. Over time, the ability to distinguish real insight from illusion becomes a skill that shapes not only inner practice but daily life, allowing the seeker to move through the world with greater clarity. The heart plays a crucial role in this work. Symbols resonate most fully when the seeker engages with them sincerely and with compassion. A heart clouded by self-interest or fear distorts perception, while a heart polished through honesty, reflection, and humility allows images to speak clearly. Steiner compared this inner refinement to preparing a vessel. Only when the container is clean and open can the hidden currents flow freely into consciousness. The seeker learns that discernment is less about controlling perception and more about cultivating readiness to receive truth. As the trial continues, the seeker gradually learns the rhythm of authentic vision. Each encounter with a symbol becomes a dialogue, a subtle test of moral and perceptual integrity. The hidden record is neither passive nor indifferent. It mirrors the state of the observer, offering guidance that is truthful and aligned with the currents of life. The next stage of the journey emerges naturally from this work. Once discernment is practiced and the heart prepared, humility and surrender become the doorways through which the Akashic Records open more fully, revealing layers of insight that extend beyond individual perception. Humility as a doorway. Access to the deeper currents of the Akashic Records demands more than discernment and stillness. It requires the inner posture of humility. Pride, the need to control or dominate one's experience, creates barriers invisible to the conscious mind. Steiner emphasized that the records cannot be summoned by force or intellect alone. They appear only when the seeker approaches with openness, readiness, and a willingness to release personal agendas. The moment of true humility transforms the seeker's relationship with knowledge itself, shifting from possession to participation. Humility is not weakness or passivity. It is a conscious recognition of one's limits and a surrender to the larger currents that move through life. Meister Eckhart taught that to know God, a man must become empty of himself. The emptiness he described is not an absence of consciousness, but a clearing of egoic striving, leaving space for insight to emerge unimpeded. Steiner echoed this idea, explaining that when the seeker sets aside attachment to personal outcomes, the hidden record can communicate freely, revealing patterns and connections that the self-centered mind could never grasp. The process begins subtly. A symbol or intuition may appear in meditation, carrying clarity beyond ordinary thought. The seeker notices a quieting of internal insistence, a willingness to receive without judgment or expectation. Pride, with its drive to dominate or predict, dissipates, and what arises in consciousness carries a sense of inevitability, an undeniable resonance. Steiner described this as the alignment of inner posture with the currents of existence, a state in which the Akashic flow can move unblocked. Humility also transforms the way time and self are experienced. In ordinary perception, the ego seeks linear control, to plan, interpret, and master every moment. When humility is cultivated, however, the seeker becomes receptive to the rhythms of the unseen world. The images and insights from the records arrive organically, often beyond any conscious timetable. The sense of self expands to accommodate the greater flow, while still maintaining the integrity of individuality. It is a paradoxical state. The self steps aside yet remains present, allowing the hidden currents to speak. Even ordinary encounters with life begin to carry hints of this deeper flow. A conversation, a natural pattern, or a fleeting thought may appear charged with meaning, a reflection of the Akashic currents subtly at work. Steiner described these moments as invitations to participate in the underlying intelligence of the world, to notice how humility allows insight to move through the seeker without obstruction. Every act of yielding, of releasing control, strengthens the vessel of perception, making future encounters with the records increasingly vivid and coherent. The mind, once trained in discernment, now meets humility as its companion. It recognizes that the first signs of insight may be fragile, easily disrupted by egoic interference. Steiner emphasized patience at this stage. Even slight traces of pride can obscure perception, while continued humility expands receptivity. The seeker learns to cultivate a careful balance, observing without grasping, participating without claiming. In this way, the records reveal themselves gradually, offering glimpses that deepen over time as the inner posture matures. Humility also opens the heart. Where pride narrows understanding, the humble seeker finds spaciousness, an ability to engage with the currents of existence without resistance. Insights from the hidden record no longer serve personal gain or vanity. They resonate as guidance, ethical orientation, and subtle understanding of life's interconnectedness. Steiner noted that this alignment between inner posture and universal flow is essential, for the records reflect not only external reality, but the state of the seeker's consciousness. Clarity emerges only when egoic interference is set aside. The transformation is experiential. The first encounters with the Akashic currents bring a sense of awe and wonder, a recognition that life extends far beyond the limits of ordinary perception. Steiner described this as the moment when the seeker begins to sense the living tapestry of events, intentions, and possibilities. Symbols, patterns, and images arise with a quiet authority, carrying knowledge that cannot be manufactured or forced. Humility creates the conditions for this reception, turning the seeker into a participant rather than a spectator. Through ongoing practice, the posture of humility becomes habitual. Each meditation, each attentive observation, strengthens the readiness to receive insight. The records appear not because they are summoned, but because the seeker has aligned the inner world with the currents of the unseen. What was once distant or hidden begins to unfold naturally, and the mind, now quiet, discerning, and humble, is ready to move deeper. From this doorway, the next stage emerges, the direct unveiling of the Akashic Records, where the hidden memory of existence begins to communicate with immediacy and presence. The moment of unveiling. There comes a point in practice when preparation and humility converge, and the hidden currents begin to reveal themselves with immediacy. The first encounter with the Akashic Records is not gradual or distant. It arrives as a sudden clarity, a moment where the ordinary sense of time seems to dissolve. Past, present, and future converge into a single perception, and the seeker experiences the intricate weave of cause and effect that underlies all life. Steiner described this as a profound awakening, a glimpse of reality's deeper structure that cannot be captured by thought alone. The experience is both exhilarating and humbling. Ordinary concerns, ambitions, and fears fade as attention is drawn to the larger tapestry of existence. Symbols, images, and impressions move with a presence and authority unlike anything previously encountered. The Akashic currents do not need to be forced or interpreted immediately. They communicate through clarity and resonance. Each perception carries weight, a sense of inevitability, and the recognition that every action, thought, and intention leaves a lasting imprint on the unfolding story of life. Time collapses in unexpected ways. Events that seemed separate appear connected, consequences and causes intertwining across moments and lifetimes. Steiner emphasized that this perception is not intellectual, but intuitive and experiential. It is a direct apprehension of patterns that transcend ordinary logic. In this state, the mind becomes a receptive instrument, capable of seeing the hidden threads that shape human existence. The images, once symbols in the mind, now reveal the living connections behind them, demonstrating the harmony and complexity of the unseen world. Alongside clarity comes awe. The depth and precision of the Akashic currents carry a profound sense of intelligence that permeates all life. The seeker realizes the magnitude of what is observed, and the humility cultivated through prior practice deepens. The experience is not one of ownership or mastery, but of participation and attentive witnessing. Steiner noted that the records reveal themselves fully only to those who approach with ethical integrity, readiness, and respect, recognizing that this knowledge carries responsibility as much as insight. This responsibility aligns closely with a core Buddhist teaching on right view and right action. The perception of cause and effect is not meant to satisfy curiosity or vanity. It demands ethical discernment. Awareness of the hidden currents brings the understanding that choices ripple outward, influencing the lives of others and the flow of events beyond immediate perception. The seeker learns that knowledge without integrity can become a source of harm. The Akashic vision is therefore inseparable from moral orientation, teaching. That clarity must be coupled with responsibility. The images and patterns perceived in this moment are vivid and tangible. Scenes of human experience, intertwined with natural and cosmic forces, appear with an unmistakable coherence. Steiner described these as living threads, not static records, each one carrying context, intention, and meaning. The seeker senses that these threads are not only about observation, but about engagement. Each perception is a call to deepen understanding and act in alignment with the currents perceived. Insight without action remains incomplete, for the records mirror both the world and the seeker's capacity to interact with it wisely. Even brief encounters with this unveiling leave lasting effects. Ordinary perception of life shifts subtly. The mind begins to notice connections and patterns previously overlooked. Events that once seemed accidental now resonate with significance, and choices feel weighted with consequence. Steiner emphasized that these initial glimpses are only the beginning. They invite continued practice, reflection, and cultivation of awareness. The Akashic currents reveal themselves incrementally, responding to readiness, humility, and the ethical orientation of the seeker. The first encounter also deepens the understanding of interconnectedness. The perception of how individual intentions ripple through collective existence evokes both reverence and responsibility. Steiner suggested that such insight carries a transformative potential, shaping how one approaches daily life and interaction with others. The awe of this moment is balanced by the need to act with discernment, integrity, and compassion, allowing knowledge to inform behavior rather than inflate the ego. This unveiling marks a threshold. The seeker stands at the interface between ordinary awareness and the living memory of existence. Each perception carries guidance, each symbol a reflection of deeper currents. The challenge is not merely to observe, but to integrate the insight ethically and consciously. From this point, the journey naturally moves toward the responsibilities that accompany such a vision, guiding the seeker to apply understanding thoughtfully, align action with insight, and navigate the world with awareness of the consequences that extend beyond immediate perception. The weight of responsibility. Perceiving the Akashic Records is not a casual accomplishment. The first glimpse carries an undeniable charge, a realization that knowledge extends beyond mere curiosity. Steiner emphasized that insight into these hidden currents is a call to live more truthfully. Every perception, every symbol, reflects not only the patterns of the universe but the state of the seeker's own consciousness. The responsibility is immediate. Understanding must be paired with ethical attention, for the currents respond to integrity as much as awareness. The challenge lies in balancing light and shadow. The seeker sees the interweaving of intentions, actions, and consequences, including those that are morally ambiguous or troubling. Steiner noted that the Akashic Records mirror both clarity and distortion, revealing potentials for growth as well as pitfalls of misuse. To ignore what is perceived is itself a form of neglect, while acting without discernment risks amplifying harm. Responsibility emerges not from obligation alone, but from the recognition that insight is inseparable from the ethical dimension of existence. Steiner also connected this responsibility to spiritual evolution. Humanity is not static. Each individual contributes to a broader unfolding of consciousness. Knowledge of the records offers a lens into that evolution, showing how personal choices influence collective development. The seeker begins to perceive life as a web of interdependent threads, where intentions ripple outward and shape experiences beyond immediate awareness. Understanding this interconnectedness fosters humility, discipline, and a sense of purpose, framing insight as a communal task rather than a solitary privilege. Each insight demands reflection. The seeker may encounter visions of human actions, both noble and destructive, interwoven across time. Steiner described how these patterns are not judgmental, they simply reveal truth. To act responsibly, one must assess not only the information perceived, but one's capacity to engage with it constructively. The weight of this responsibility is part of the training, teaching the seeker to integrate understanding into choices, relationships, and daily conduct. Ethical maturity becomes inseparable from perceptual clarity. The Akashic currents do not offer shortcuts. They reveal depth, pattern, and consequence, but the seeker must navigate these currents consciously. Steiner emphasized that the path is iterative. Insight leads to action, action to reflection, and reflection to deeper insight. Each cycle strengthens both the ability to perceive and the capacity to act wisely. The records are a mirror, reflecting intentions and potential outcomes, and they teach that knowledge alone is insufficient without disciplined ethical engagement. Responsibility also extends to self-awareness. The seeker must confront personal shadow alongside the perception of external patterns. Steiner suggested that the clarity of vision is contingent on honesty with oneself. For the records amplify both light and darkness within the observer. Shadows unexamined can distort interpretation, influence decisions, and interfere with the harmonious integration of insight. Ethical discernment is therefore a practice of continuous self-reflection, as well as external engagement. In practicing responsibility, the seeker begins to notice subtle connections between individual choices and collective evolution. Steiner emphasized that each person's spiritual development contributes to the unfolding of humanity. By acting with integrity and alignment with the insights perceived, the seeker participates in the broader task of human progress. Knowledge of the records becomes a tool not for self-aggrandizement, but for cultivating alignment between inner clarity and outer contribution, strengthening the bond between individual awareness and communal evolution. The sense of weight that accompanies this knowledge is tempered by guidance, inherent in the records themselves. Patterns arise with coherence and clarity, signaling which actions are constructive and which may create imbalance. Steiner described this as a feedback system. The seeker's moral alignment influences how perception unfolds, and perception in turn shapes the capacity for ethical action. Responsibility and insight exist in a dynamic interplay, reinforcing one another in the process of spiritual growth. Through continued engagement, the seeker begins to navigate the currents of knowledge with increasing maturity. The weight of responsibility is no longer a burden, but a conscious awareness of the ripple effects of action, thought, and intention. Each decision, each reflection, becomes a dialogue with the unseen patterns of existence, a practice that integrates insight into life. This prepares the mind and heart for a wider perspective, one that moves beyond the individual and into the collective dimension of human evolution, where the Akashic currents guide both personal and communal awakening. The collective memory of humanity. Every individual thread in life is part of a vast tapestry. Steiner emphasized that the Akashic Records are not merely personal, they reflect the unfolding memory of humanity itself. Each action, each intention, leaves an imprint, not only in the immediate sphere of life, but in the shared currents of collective consciousness. The records, in this sense, function as the great memory of human experience, containing the accumulated wisdom, mistakes, aspirations, and insights of generations. Perceiving them invites a shift in perspective, from self-centered perception to an awareness of life as a continuous, interconnected flow. This collective memory is both a mirror and a guide. Steiner noted that by observing patterns in the hidden record, one can recognize the consequences of choices and the ripple effects that extend far beyond immediate understanding. Each thread contributes to the larger narrative. An insight into this weaving encourages the seeker to act with intentionality. The awareness that individual life resonates within a greater whole fosters humility, responsibility, and presence, reminding the observer that the currents of existence are shared, delicate, and profoundly meaningful. The African concept of Sankofa captures a similar idea. Its wisdom teaches that one must go back to fetch what has been forgotten, understanding the past in order to shape the future. In relation to the Akashic Records, this principle becomes practical. The hidden memory of humanity is not only a repository of events, but a source of lessons, guidance, and insight that can be retrieved consciously. By engaging with these currents, the seeker reconnects with what has been lost or overlooked, allowing past experiences to illuminate present action and future intention. Even small recognitions of the collective memory can transform perception of daily life. Ordinary encounters, conversations, or decisions suddenly gain depth as the seeker senses how they resonate in the broader flow. Steiner described this as perceiving life in layers. The surface actions remain visible, but below them run currents of meaning, consequence, and potential. Awareness of these patterns nurtures both care and courage, encouraging choices aligned with truth rather than convenience or habit. The Akashic currents are not limited to mystics or those with exceptional abilities. Steiner emphasized that any soul willing to cultivate presence, sincerity, and attention can engage with this living memory. The records are democratic in their accessibility. They respond not to status, achievement, or talent, but to readiness of heart and clarity of mind. Each seeker, in aligning with the ethical and attentive posture cultivated through practice, becomes a participant in the unfolding memory of humanity, contributing to its understanding and coherence. As the hidden record unfolds, the individual begins to sense continuity beyond a single lifetime. Patterns emerge that demonstrate the interplay of human intention and collective consequence. Steiner often pointed out that the more one perceives, the more apparent it becomes that humanity's evolution is co-created. The records show that no action exists in isolation, and even seemingly small choices carry echoes that extend through time and space. Recognizing this fosters both awe and accountability, highlighting the role of each soul in sustaining the integrity of the human story. This awareness encourages the seeker to approach life with attention and care. Every thought, every decision becomes an opportunity to participate consciously in the broader tapestry. Steiner suggested that as one grows accustomed to perceiving the Akashic currents, ordinary life transforms into a continuous practice of awareness. The records reveal themselves in subtle ways, in gestures, relationships, and encounters, reminding the observer that the sacred is woven into everyday existence. The invitation of the Akashic Records is ongoing. Each moment offers the possibility of alignment with the currents of truth and presence. Like the principle of Sankofa, the seeker is called to revisit what has been overlooked, to learn from the collective memory, and to integrate that wisdom into life. Steiner framed this as a journey without finality. Each step of insight, each act of ethical engagement, deepens the connection between the individual and the greater whole, allowing the records to speak more clearly and intimately over time. In this way, the records serve as both mirror and guide, reflecting what has been and illuminating what may come. Each life is a thread, contributing to the evolving tapestry of humanity. Steiner's vision invites a profound awareness. The hidden memory is accessible to any soul willing to cultivate stillness, humility, and sincerity. The journey does not end. It continues each time one chooses to see with presence, to act with integrity, and to participate consciously in the ongoing story of collective evolution. Thank you for watching. If you found this journey into the Akashic Records inspiring, don't forget to subscribe and join the conversation in the comments below.